it was 200 years of exception, actually.
Yeah.
200 years of exception. It was an exception in China history. It's very clear to me. I can see it very clearly. But as you said, it's not the common sense, mainly in the West, because it's
because
very...
Westerns don't have memory.
No, our memory is very short. Brazil was
500 years.
The Western history of Brazil started 500 years ago, and our country was independent in 1822. So it's yesterday for China.
Yeah.
In the Chinese point of view,
It's last minute, actually.
Germany it was born as a nation in 1888. So it's yesterday in the perspective of the Chinese. And it's very... Go ahead.
There's actually, because the Portuguese is actually one of the first European people that made it to China.
Yep.
In the modern times. There's actually a lot of linkage, say between Brazil and China, because the Portuguese brought a lot of American crops from the Americas. They introduced them to China, like peanuts. Peanuts is from the Amazon, right? And they also introduce I don't know if Portuguese tobacco. It could be Spanish, could be the Portuguese tobacco and corn. Tobacco, potatoes.
Corn is American,
yeah.
Potatoes, yes.
Yeah. So these all transform China as well in the modern times, because China experienced a population explosion, because before a lot of the hillside cannot, you can't farm the hills, but now you have the American crops of potatoes and corn. You can plant potatoes and corn on the hillside, and suddenly China experienced a population explosion. It went from like 100 million people in the 1600s to like 400 million people in the 1840s. Wow. I mean, so there's that connection. Because Portuguese they're very early on to establish an outpost on the coast of China in Macau. They were able to. They first tried to force their way into China. When that didn't work, they bribed the local officials to allow them to put up an outpost, which was much more successful. So they had the
business as usual.
Yeah, they had the settlement in corruption works better. they had settlement worked in Macau, and so that's kind of the Portuguese connection in China. Besides all the and plus, Portuguese they came to Southeast Asia. They took over the Straits of Malacca. They destroyed the Sultanate of Malacca, and so from there they tried to muscle their way into. One of the way that enabled Portuguese to stay in East Asia is a trade between. The Portuguese, their presence in East Asia wasn't really depending on carrying the trade back from China to Europe, but to act as a middleman between China and Japan, because Japan at that time, China experienced a lot of problem with Japanese pirates. So the Ming Dynasty, China said, okay, that's it. We're going to ban all the Japanese ships from the Chinese coast. But there was a great demand in Japan for Chinese silk, but there's a great demand for silver in China, and they just discovered silver mine in Japan at that time. But the Japanese ship cannot enter Chinese harbor, so this is where the Portuguese came in. They set up their shop in Macau after bribing the Chinese official, and then they were able to trade in Nagasaki in Japan. So suddenly Portuguese act as a middleman between the largest economy in the East Asia, China and Japan, and that enabled basically Portuguese to stay in East Asia. That's what made the Portuguese settlement in East Asia profitable.
Great.
And so this is another connection. And but I think more connection came in the modern time between China and Brazil because especially with China's large population, it needs to import food, and China and Brazil is one of the largest exporter of agricultural commodities.
Agriculture in the world, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was actually one thing that they don't teach us on school in Brazil, and they should. In 1964, we had the coup d'état from the army. I mean the U.S. sponsored coup d'état in Brazil, and it was not exactly a military coup d'état. It was the military was involved, but it was more a political coup d'état. So we had our president that simply gave up, publicly announced that he was retiring from the president, and the vice president was in China, developing business with China. It was supposed to be a development of direct business trade between Brazil and China. And well, that's just en passant of what was going on at that moment. And well, after that, then the military took the presidency, and we had, like most American countries, we had the dictatorship from the military. Which at the end drove Brazil away from the East and pivoted toward the United States and the United States commerce.
Yeah, the United States, they went on that time to be the middleman in between China and the rest of the world. That's the fact. And
United States sees Latin America as it's like precious, like if you think the United States is Gollum in the Lord of the Rings, Latin America is its precious. You can't let go.
That's
precious.
That's true.
I mean, that's where the Monroe Doctrine came from. It all want to keep Latin America its backyard. That's why they have all these freak out. That's why they have all these freak out in the right wing television space in US when they see Brazil having trade deal with China. It's like, oh my God, China is taking over Latin America. They're trying to sneak. They're trying to sneak on us from our southern border. We have to stop.
They are attacking us.
Yes, true.
They are attacking us. China is attacking us by having business with other people. Well,
yes.
And when you listen to these things, it just gets more moronic every time.
Oh yeah. It's crazy that they really believe it. I can understand the mechanics on the American brain to really believe that we are their possession, their spoils. It's hard to understand it.
And a lot of the thing is like self-sabotaging too, because United States is actually a great agricultural exporter to China.
Yes.
It was a complementary economy in that sense, but all these senators and politicians are up alarm about Chinese coming here, buying American farms and American products are taking over. So now with U.S. trying to put all the trade sanction on China, China's like, look, man, food is very basic security. We have to have food security. We can't depend on the Americans in the United States to provide our food security. We have to look elsewhere. And where they go to Brazil. I mean,
Thank you very much.
yeah.
Let's make some business.
Let's make money. That's the thing.
Yeah.
The United States, it seems that they simply forgot that the basic of making money is not invading people. It's making trade. So
Sure that. This is
well,
That's why I like to say China's business is business. U.S. business is war.
Yes.
So
Yes, that's pretty much exactly it. It is very, very clear to everybody, even not knowing a lot about the subject, but it's very clear to everybody that China was a great empire in the past. People know it.
well, it should
China
be clear.
was, yeah. But people normally people know they have this idea that China was a great empire in the ancient times and etc. But in the middle of the 19th century, we have the beginning of the century of shame, the century of humiliation, the century of humiliation, and because the foreigners arrived and start to China lost a lot of wars and all this stuff. Is it possible to indicate a point, a fact that shows, explain this weakness, why China fall on that time? Because it was this great empire. What was the political model? They were too feudal, or what was happening in China that was so easy to the foreigners go there and break it?
this is a great topic of study, actually, among Chinese intellectuals as well. Like, where did we go wrong? Like, where did we go so disastrously wrong? Why is it the Industrial Revolution happened in England, but not in China, despite China have such a leg up for a long time. I think there's a great book called The Great Divergence by American professor, US professor Kenneth Pomeranz, who tried to attempt to answer that question. And he, I think he did a good job to show that the most prosperous part, because China is pretty huge. I mean, it's composed of quite different regions. So he concentrated on the most prosperous region of China, which is the lower Yangtze River Delta region around the present-day Shanghai, which has been the most prosperous part of China for the last 1,000 years. And he compared that to England. And his conclusion was very interesting. One is that China is basically a victim of its own success, because China from the 1600s to the 1800s, it experienced like almost 200 years of, it experienced like 150 years of peace, of long peace, which means China didn't need to develop its military anymore because there's peace. In the meantime, if you know anything about European history, between 1600 to 1800, that was a very tumultuous era in Europe. So the European states were constantly fighting each other, and they perfected the art of war, right? All the gunpowder technology that were transmitted originally from China to Europe, and they took it to the next level because there's a need to constantly up each other during the very intense state-to-state warfare in Europe at that time. So there's a military advancement in Europe, and then on the other hand, China was the reason China was a victim of its success. I already kind of covered this. Was due to the importation of American crops. Now all the hillsides, southern China's hillside, can be planted with corns and potatoes. There was a population explosion from like 150 million to like 400 million. But without like improvement in technology, without a breakthrough in technology, when your population suddenly quadrupled, it created like a lot of Malthusian pressure on the land, because one example is, at that time most people use wood for fuel. So when your population suddenly quadruple, you are stripping the mountains of forests to eat, just to burn. And And but England and a lot of the Western European countries, they were able to escape that that dilemma, that conundrum, by going out and acquire a lot of colonies. So it's because they had a lot vast resources of American continent. And on top of that, Europe also has another, particular England has a big advantage, is that one of the problems is still, you're burning wood. You're burning wood, so you're destroying the environment when your population grows big. But then England has a large coal deposit that's very close to be used. So that's how that they figure out how to use the coal, to harvest coal and for energy and use that for steam engine and one thing to turn into another, and use it for textile production. For China, unfortunately, the most prosperous part and technologically advanced part of China is the lower Yangtze River Valley, Delta Valley around Shanghai. It doesn't have any coal deposit around that area. All the coals in China are in the northwest, far away from all the population centers, and there's no like major water transport to reach, to take the coal from that part of the country to the lower Yangtze River Valley. So it didn't have all these, like, one of the things that Kenneth Pomeranz proposed is like, it's not like the China and the rest of the world are actually, all the world were on the path of development, but the path of development was about, kind of on the same pace, because he was able to improve the quality of life in China in the 1700s is about the same as Northwest Europe at the same time. But what happened was, because the England were able to harness the fossil fuel first, and they were able to they have all these vast resources that cry from having colonies. They have the capital accumulation from in the colonies, including the slave trade and etc. And that enabled all these various factors that made England the exception. So that's why the Industrial Revolution first happened in England, but nowhere else. But the other Western European countries, because of their proximity to England, they got the osmosis effect. So after England industrialized, you have France and later Germany that were able to quickly catch up and industrialize. But China, because it's also geographically isolated, by the time when the British sent its fleet to knock on China's door in the Opium War in 1840, England has already completed its first round of the first industrial revolution. When Britain waged Opium War on China, it was sending steamships, ironclad steam warships after Yangtze. So at that time, it's like a qualitative difference. They had a qualitative edge in technology. They were using, and England also acquired rocket technology from the Indians they conquered, because the rocket technology was originally developed in China, but it started to diffuse around the world. But when the British were conquering India, they acquired the rocket technology from the Indians. So during the Opium War, the British ironclad steamships were firing rockets to improve rockets into Chinese, to burn up the Chinese warships, war junks. And so this is why China fell behind. Because China missed the boat of the first industrial revolution. And one of the things that kind of differ in the development with China and Japan, its neighbor, is that Japan were very quickly to pivot to adopt a wholesale westernization program in the late 18th century. They actually, at that time, Japan actually had a slogan called "Leaving Asia, Joining Europe," and they adopted the whole program, including imperialism too. Including imperialism and colonialism. So they went full on westernization, but China was a little bit slow to change, because China is a large country, and two, Japan had a revolution essentially, because the old shogun government in Japan was overthrown. in the during the Meiji restoration. The local warlords in Japan, they overthrow their government, and when they came to the government, they employ a lot of the reformers to carry out the reform. Whereas in China, the reformer faction was a lot weaker because the central authority, the imperial authority, still maintain a lot of control, and there's still a lot of the more conservative elements resisted the reform effort. So the reform in China was kind of half, piecemeal and half-hearted versus Japan's full westernization program. And that's why when China and Japan clashed in the first Sino-Japanese War in 1895, Japan defeated China, which shocked the world because nobody expected that to happen. Because for centuries, for thousands of years, Japan was kind of a student of China, of Chinese civilization. They copied the Chinese writing, the Chinese Confucian culture, everything. They got, they even got their Buddhism from China. And suddenly there was a student who were able to defeat the master, and that kind of shook China up a little bit. But China still had a lot of difficulty at that time because one, you face a population explosion that was exceeding the land carrying capacity. Given there was no technology breakthrough because there's no industrial revolution in China, China didn't industrialize. And then on top of that, you have the Opium War. The British come in, is draining all the silver out of the country. Before silver were flowing into China from the Americas. Like 50% of the silver mined in the Americas from 1600s to 1800s, 50% of the American silver eventually flowed to China through the cross-Pacific trade. But the Opium War reversed that because the British decided to push drugs and they traded the drugs, the opium, for Chinese silver. So silver were flowing out of the country. Chinese people are getting impoverished, getting addicted, and then China experienced a catastrophic civil war, the Taiping Rebellion, which some estimate between 20 to 30 million people died. So that devastated some of the most prosperous regions in China, including the lower Yangtze River Valley area around Shanghai, and that area became battlefield. So China was broken, and then you had repeated Western intervention. There was not one opium war; there were two opium wars, and after there was Russian coming up from the north, and there was French coming in, taking Vietnam and threatening China from the south. So it was a Sino-French war in 1874-75, and then there's a Sino-Japanese war in 1895, and then there was Boxer Rebellion in 1900 because all the Chinese peasants finally fed up. They're already fed up with all the Western powers coming into China, do whatever they want. And one of the things they do is proselytizing because the Western, they want to convert China to a Christian country. So one of the conditions for the Western power is that China must allow the missionaries to come in to build churches and to proselytize. And that aroused a lot of local sentiment because they see their way of life, their tradition being threatened by outside powers. That led to the Boxer Rebellion, which is kind of, you can say it's xenophobic, but they were on the receiving end of the Western powers, and that led to the Eight Nation Alliance invasion of China. The Eight Nation was basically like all the nations in Europe. You have UK, France, Germany, Italy, Austro-Hungarian Empire. You have United States. You have Russia. You have Japan, and everybody was just carving up China as a slice of pie, and they're carving up a sphere of influence. And then China then had a revolution because they see a lot of the reform-minded Chinese see things are not working. They feel like the imperial government is a problem. They're impediment for reform. So they overthrow the Qing dynasty. They ended the monarchy rule in China for thousands of years. But then things didn't improve because what happened was that China fell into warlordism. Like the empire collapsed. A different part of China got taken over by warlords who have their own warlord armies fighting each other, and they're backed by different foreign power. Italy was backing one faction, United States and Britain was backing another faction, the Russian were backing another faction, and Japanese backing another faction. So you have a period of war until 1920s. So Dr. Sun Yat-sen, he went to southern China. He went to Canton, today's Guangzhou, to form a new government. And he received an unexpected aid from the newly formed Soviet Union, because at that time, the Soviets, they were under siege. They were under siege by the Allied powers. So there was an Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War. So they want to break out this diplomatic isolation. And so they try to sponsor like a national liberalization movement all across the world. Like they tried with Ataturk in Turkey. And then at the same time, they tried to support Dr. Sun Yat-sen in China. The Soviet came in with arms, military advisors, and money, and they supported Sun Yat-sen's attempt to form a new KMT party with the condition that they must work with the newly formed the Chinese Communist Party. And so there was a communist and KMT coalition government, and they decided we're going to take the war to warlords. And that was 1927. There was a northern expedition. They launched a northern expedition across China to take China back from the warlords government. But as the northern expedition progressed to Shanghai, when the communist-led unions took over Shanghai from the warlord government, the commander of the northern expedition, a guy named Chiang Kai-shek, he felt threatened by the communist power. He felt like, okay, eventually there's going to have to become a time we have to take care of the communists. Why not to do it now rather than wait later? So he initiated the Shanghai Massacre. He did a purge of the communists in Shanghai in 1927. So that led the split between the communists and the KMT government. And Mao, at that time, led a group of the communist soldiers into the mountains in southern China to form a guerrilla base, and that at the same time China was still not united, right? China had the communists fighting the nationalists, but the nationalist government are fighting other Chinese warlords in other part of China, in northern China and northeast China, and then the Japanese came in. In 1931, they came into Manchuria, and they keep exactly.